And once again, I'm thrilled to welcome you all to our January Community of Practice webinar. It is January 21st, 2026, and we're here to better understand our COVES data files in Excel. So I am going to be screen sharing. For those of you who just joined, there are some links in the chat. Actually, Mallory and Allison, if you could repost those in just about 5 minutes, and I'll reshare the data files. But we're going to be walking through things in Excel. To start, one of the reasons we're having today's webinar is because the COVES team on the back end has been working on restructuring the data files themselves. So there's been no change to the surveys or the dashboards or anything like that that you would have noticed. But when cleaning the data files, we've been trying to make them simpler and easier to use, which means we're cutting out duplicate variables or crazy codings. We're getting rid of metadata. We've put variables in a new order. So if you've been doing this for a while and you take a look at the files, you might think they look different, and that's good. And if you've never looked at them before, hopefully they're not as crazy as you might be expecting. But I'm going to show you, and we're going to talk through the variables, the coding to make it easier for you to use and access. I was going to highlight some crazy facts about the size of our collaboration, just to give you a sense of the scale of data that we have. Since July 1st, 2023, when we put out the current web link to the surveys that you're using now, because every few years we refresh them, we have collected more than 112,000 visitor surveys across all of the many sites. And because of that, and because of the uniqueness of all of you, there are more than 5,700 variables in the combined data set. So it's my job to make sure you're not looking at 111,000 responses and 5,700 and change variables, right? I'm trying to give you only what you need and no more, so it's not too overwhelming. In the last year alone, since January of 2025, the art cohorts have collected over 30,000 responses because there's more than 100 of those museums. In the Science Plus cohort, which is about 40 and change museums, have 18,000 responses. But again, the scope of the variables don't change. Another way of saying that is if you had a temporary exhibition in the fall of 2023, that variable is still in your data. It's still in our Qualtrics database. It doesn't go away. It never gets deleted. It just gets hidden from the visitor view, right? So you always have access to that data and can go back and look at it historically. So that's one of the reasons things are so complex, and one of the reasons we need to do this walkthrough of the potentially very large data files. I also wanted to give a few disclaimers. You know that our surveys are core. They're designed for longitudinal analysis. They're designed for comparisons across sites. But as much as things stay the same, they also inevitably change. We made a number of core variable changes in July of 2024. And as all of you know, you can send us calendar updates, well in advance, make updates to your experience lists. So things are constantly changing. The variable lists are always updating. And we're trying to manage all of that. Let's see, blah, 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 blah. There's just a lot of junk in here, my mental thoughts as I was preparing this. And the last point about that kind of variable that from the fall of 2023 might still be there. Every month when we do the data cleaning and try and return it to you, your file in theory gets larger, right? So it is inclusive of all responses, which means it'll grow and grow and grow. And the nomenclature that I use is for the month in which the surveys were collected, not the month in which the cleaning or returning of the data files happens. So your current files should say _ December 25. So if you've been in Dropbox or got your files, that's what it should say. That's what it should look like. That's what it will say. Now, if you've never been on Dropbox or you've never seen your raw data files, or you're saying like, I didn't even know this process exists, don't worry about it. We're going to do the walkthrough today with it's not a dummy data file, it's a real data file, but it's just a random assortment of cases for us to look at. And then in the week and a half leading up to February, we'll make sure everyone has their Dropbox link again. If you've had it, great, we'll reshare it with you. If you've never had it before, we'll share it with you so that in February you can see the January data fresh and clean with a hopefully better understanding than you started the year with. So that's our goal for today. Having said that, I'm going to do this one more time. There are two CSV files in the chat. So again, if you are watching this recording later in life on our YouTube channel, you can email me if you want to walk through the exact same data file that we're looking at. But otherwise, this is just for folks on today's call. Allison, thank you for reposting the links. And again, you should have 2 CSV files in the chat. Before going to the CSVs, go ahead and download them, open them, do whatever you want. We're going to start with the first web link that Allison just reshared, which is the COVES Survey Explained. Now, because you all have access to this on your screens, actually, you know what? I'll just screen share real fast, just because I can. All right, so very quickly, if you've never taken a look at this before, this is our COVES Survey Instrument Explained. As you can see up in the web URL, this is on our website. You will always have access to this. Whenever we make an update, we'll post it to the web, and we'll also let you know that things have changed. But you can see that the date here is from 2024, when we did last make those core survey changes. The reason I'm showing you all this is because the newest data file that you all should be looking at whenever you access your own data and today on the call, the format of the file is, as best possible, going to follow the structure of the instrument explained rather than the exact order that your visitors see it. So we're trying to keep all the core questions up front and anything that's site specific at the end. So if you were wondering, gee, what's this NPS variable? How is OER asked? Where are the motivation categories? You can use the instrument explained to follow along with your data file to make sure you understand what we're talking about when we're asking all the 0 to 10 ratings or down in the demographics section. So I'm scrolling very quickly here because I want you to get a sense of, with the zip code, you can see that we explain the logic. If they say they live in the US, they get the zip code question. If they don't, they get in what country do you currently reside? So you can infer from that that if you see blanks in the zip code space, or if you see a no for the US question, you might look in the country variable instead of the zip code variable. So some things like that. So as you're looking at your data file, please rely on the instrument explained as a resource for how to follow along sequentially. All right, and the second link that is posted in the chat is a refined version of a code book that has been shared with you on previous webinars and in previous resource folders. This one is the COVES code book, but it is simplified. So the first tab down here, the info, just kind of gives a few basics. We did tailor this version of it for today's webinar. In the shared questions tab, you should be able to go through your data files row by row here and look at the variable name, the question as it is posed to visitors, or a short description of it. Any other information over here in column C for the variable name, and then importantly, in column D, response options. So some of these are text-based and will say directly. Some of these will have discrete options available, depending on the method, for example, that the survey was administered. But for some of them, you might be looking for the numeric codes and what those numbers represent. So for NPS, we know the scale goes from 0 to 10. That won't change. For the NPS group variable, though, there's only a 1, 2, and 3. So you can see the codes here for detractive, passive, and promoter. That way, you shouldn't get confused if one is promoter or detractor. You can rely on the code book to give you the codes for the numeric variables, or sorry, the numeric codes for the variables, and so on and so forth. I'm going to pause here very quickly to allow Mallory to jump in since she has been graciously devoting her time to curating this. If you want to talk about one-hot encoding or any other particulars for the codebook.
Yeah, I can really quickly just share one hot encoding. The way that I'm using it here, I'm not 100% positive is the correct way to use it, but what I mean by this is when you see a variable that's labeled one hot encoding, what that means is that there are actually a number of variables representing this question. And because this is a question where people can select more than one, for each option, there is a column in your raw data set. And if that option was selected by that person, there's a 1 in that row for that column. And they can have multiple selections made across these different columns for the different options. So that's what one hot encoding is. I'd also just say if you encounter anything else, or if you're like, that didn't make any sense because I did it really fast or anything like that, if you shoot an email to the COVES inbox, I will gladly take that for you and answer that question about this codebook if you are confused.
Great. Thanks, Mallory. Yeah, so the motivations question is a good one. Hopefully, all of you are familiar with that question where we ask why visitors chose to come today, right? Why did you decide to visit today? And you can see right here in the description of the question, it says select up to two. This is also probably very small for you, but we're not going to spend too much time here. In fact, I'm just going to jump out of this sharing of the screen. The motivation question allows visitors to select up to two category responses. Rather than shoving all of those words or numbers into a single column in your data file to explain which selections they made, each distinct motivational category has a column, right? And if they select it, there will be a 1 there, and if they didn't select it, there will be a blank. So to illustrate this, I'm going to dive right into the data files, and we're going to start taking a look at how the codebook and the data file operate together. I am going to start with the values file. So both of these are the same date range, the same data. One of them has the underscore values at the end, and one of them has underscore labels at the end. I am first starting with values. And I am going to share my screen and I'm going to make it nice and big. And you're going to see as messy as it is when you open it as well. Is this working? Yes, I see at least one thumbs up. Okay. And again, if there are things coming in chat, Allison, Mallory, just jump off mute. And of course, anyone else on the call, if you prefer to come off mute, that is wonderful too. Okay, so I open this. You should be able to see that this is the values file. And here, just like in the code book, you will see the variable names, but instead of being in the left-handmost column, right, where the code book is structured going down, the data files are structured going across. So all the variables are in row number 1, and they should be sequential with the way you see them in the code book. So it's kind of like transposed. Everything that was in the code book in column A is now in row 1, and all of the data now are spread out, and I'm just scrolling down. You can see that there's probably 300 and change. Yeah, I took just a random assortment of values here. And when you open this up, for those of you who are newer to Excel, let's look at date, and you see all these hashtags or this number sign. You can expand the column to make sure you can see what's in there and how the date value is stored. You could expand response ID. This is the unique identifier that Qualtrics gives to every single response, which is helpful for you in identifying a particular row or something as it might move over time. But this allows you to isolate the individual who responded without having any individual identifying information, PII, excuse me. So you can see some very basic things. The site, because this is how we delineate across the many museums that are participating. The method by which the survey was collected. Again, staffed and QR are the primary ones. Historically, there's been email. This is in your URL. If this gets broken, things go weird very quickly, and your site-specific information might not be displayed to visitors. The duration is the duration of the survey itself. If you see blanks, that means there was some kind of tech error. Either the survey was not logged for a day and a half, or it was computed to be negative. This happens more often than you'd like to believe, and we apologize for it, but there's nothing we can do. Sometimes we just don't have the durations. It's also something we do not take into account if they finish with the QR code, because the QR code can be prohibitively long if they finish while they're offsite. I'm not going to explain every single code in the data file itself, but I want to give you a sense for what we're looking at. Now, the first thing I'll mention is that when I scroll down, row 1 immediately goes away. So if I'm trying to better understand this, I'm going to actually go up to my view settings in Excel, and I'm going to freeze the top row so that I always know what variables I'm looking at no matter where I scroll in the data set. All right, moving along, you can see here that this, again, should follow the variables that we saw in the code book, right? NPS, NPS group, NPSY. And again, this largely follows the structure of the survey as it goes out to visitors. So after the NPS question, there's the motivation question. You can see this is the one-hot encoding that Mallory was mentioning. all of these variables by themselves. Um, that's a site-specific one that you shouldn't have to pay attention to. All of these motivations by themselves, you can see there are some ones and some blanks. And any one of these visitors could have selected up to 2 responses, right? So this visitor here selected this motivational category to spend time and this motivational category for fun for a group. So the rest of them are blank. The ones are what they selected. The rest of these value label data files should look like this, just numbers, a whole bunch of numbers. And this is when people tend to get a little overwhelmed or a little bit confused. What do these numbers mean? I can't understand this, right? Like I'm looking at state, I see 21 and 9 and 999. What does all that stuff mean? Well, that's where the values file can be really helpful in the code book that we just shared the link to through Google Docs. Let's pull up I'm going to transition now to the values file, sorry, the labels file, so you can see the difference in these two. And again, please do ask some questions and jump in, because I know that staring at these while I'm toggling screens can be a lot, but hopefully you've got the data files open yourself and are poking around. All right, here is what the labels file looks like. Now you can see when I first open it, we have some of the same issues, right? The response ID column, for example, is truncated. If I want to see all the full text, I can just expand the column. The date is another one where you can just double click on the barrier between those two column headers and it will expand so you can see everything. These are the exact same data, but now notice that instead of seeing 7s for the month variable representing July, you see the word July. Instead of seeing, what is that? The 5th day of the week, Thursday, you see the word Thursday. So all of the values that are in the values file, the numbers, are represented by the response choices visitors give us, which you can see directly in this labels file. There are 2 copies of the exact same data set. It just depends on whether we're giving you the numbers to analyze or the words to analyze. You can see here where the motivations were yes, now, were ones, now they're yeses. Everything else, if it is strictly a numeric rating for educational quality, entertainment quality, the value for the cost, staff helpfulness, these are 0 to 10 ratings. They have no words to represent them, so it is just a 0 to 10 rating. And you can see all of the numbers and all of the ratings. And then again, when we get to something that actually has a word that corresponds to the visitor's response choice, do you live in the United States? Yeses and nos. Now, some of the specifics around the coding you can see here. This is a good example. If visitors do not live in the US, they're not able to give us a zip code, and that's not coded into a state, but they are asked to provide a country of residence. So this 999 here means that's missing information in the sense that the visitor was never given the question. They didn't leave it blank. They couldn't have possibly responded to it because they didn't receive that question. But the rest of these are pretty straightforward, right? They're only allowed to select one response to, do you consider yourself local? So the words are there. And if we went back to the values file, these should be values of 1, 2, and 3. The last visit, same thing. These are numeric values, but if you go to the labels file, we see that the words that they represent. Now, this makes sense in my brain because I deal with the data files all the time. But if this is hard to follow along with in the files themselves that you have access to, the code book is your best resource for trying to figure out how the values and the group local variable or the last visit variable correspond with visitor selections, these same 2 variables right here. Perusing the rest of the file, you will see sequentially, again, according to the codebook and the basic bones of the survey explained, the rest of the core questions that go to every single visitor, regardless of your site-specific questions and your museum. So how many visits? Are you a member? Number of adults and children? Some race coding, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. The raw responses to the race and ethnicity variable. education status, LGBTQ plus, income, disability, so on and so forth, right? This is down to the demographic section, and I'm just scrolling real fast to the end of, okay, so these are, you can see adult and child ages and genders. And I want to purposely move us to right here, comments. Now I'm gonna, well, I'm gonna keep screen sharing. Comments is the last question on the survey. This is the last thing that visitors see. It's the last ability for them to provide information, but it's not the last variable in our data set. After comments, there are a whole bunch of imputed variables, which are the ones that our COVES team takes and creates based on the information provided in each survey response. So the first one that we create that Qualtrics doesn't give to us and the visitors don't provide is the stay time variable. How long did visitors stay in the building? And that is computed by looking at the exit timestamp from the survey and their response to their time of entry. We then do some calculations, which are somewhat explained in the code book, of how many total boys or girls or total children with another gender are provided. We do the same thing with the adult genders. We sum the information that they provided. We sum the ages. So if you're ever looking for descriptive information on the group composition, you should be able to use the variables that we provide for that group composition information. We then go a step further. We use an API in our Qualtrics survey to reference the county and the city if they provided a valid zip code. So if you are particularly interested in different regions around your museum, you can use the county and the city. And after county and city, this is when you will start seeing site-specific information. So this is kind of the culminating piece in the data file walkthrough before I get to specific variables that you might have interest in. So after county and city, everything else, and because this is a demonstration, I just relabeled xprog show museum. This would be your variable name, sorry, your site name or your site abbreviation. But you're going to have your exhibit program show variable, which corresponds if they selected it as a motivation that they came to see a specific exhibit program or show. And then a whole bunch of see-do variables. That is your experience list, what visitors are able to select, what they saw or did, and then anything else that is unique to you. So the point of showing you this is that all of your site-specific questions, things that only apply to you, will be at the tail end of your data file. And this is really important because as you add new experiences, if you change different ratings or marketing questions or how did you get here or anything that is unique to your site, it will be in this block at the tail end of your data file. It will be in both the values and the labels file. And just like we explained with the comparison between the two, visited Arctic Adventure, right? So if this was C218, you know this is Arctic Adventure because the labels tell you that they visited Arctic Adventure. And if I were to look at the values file, all of those would just be ones and blanks. So the same experience, C218, I see the ones and the blanks. So that is the setup for the row and column organization and the difference between the values and labels. And for anything that looks blank, you might be wondering, like, why is all that data blank? Like, at least here there were some ones and some blanks, but like here there's nothing. Is that an error? The answer is no. It just depends on when those experiences were added, right? So if I scroll down, and in theory this is going over time, you can see that ones start populating because these experiences might not have been added until a certain point in the survey, right? If something was opened in December of 2025, it wouldn't appear until way down in your data file, and you could find the corresponding date that it was added or should have been added, right? So for December, here are all the December responses from this museum. And I scroll over and I can see that there are more of these C2 experiences, and these must have been turned off. All right, I'm going to pause because I've seen some comments coming in, but I know no one's jumped off of mute yet. There is some variable-specific coding to talk through, and I'm also very curious about the questions that are coming in or references that people are looking for, as this has been the showcase of what is possibly not your favorite format of data to look in. So Rosalind says, okay, good. There's a bunch of answers in the chat as well, so I don't have to over-explain anything. Yes, great question, Adam. So zip codes. Zip codes, there's a couple of, actually, there's another example too that I wanted to highlight, and we're going to work on a coding situation for. But zip codes are a great example. So when people give us numeric responses, such as zip codes, they start with zeros. Excel, right, in this case, the CSV, comma separated values format only reads the valid text. If you were to write the number 01, right, or 09 in there, it would only store the 9 or the 1 because it's thinking of that as a strict number. It does the same thing with zip codes, but you can, as Allison explains, reformat it to get the leading zero back by storing it as a zip code. There's a number of other Excel hacks that will make your ability to interpret it easier if you're reading it. But if you're summing it, or if you're doing some kind of computation with it, like creating frequencies for known zip codes in your region, reformatting it to include the zero might not be that important because you understand that's likely a Massachusetts zip code or somewhere in the New England area, and it, 1234 is 01234, and you can kind of parse it that way. But there was another example based on the actual value stored in the how many visits variable. So the options there are none. This is my first visit. I've been one time in the last 12 months. I've been two times in the last 12 months. I've been 3 to 5 times. So 3-5. And Excel, in this case, the CSV file opens it as March 5th. It thinks it's a date. So if you see that, don't be well, it's fair to be confused. I'm explaining what it means, and we are going to look for a coding solution because believe it or not, this is one of the few times I've investigated the data intimately using the CSV format, and I'm going to try and figure out a fix for all of you. What else are you seeing? What other questions do you have? How can I slow this down more? The intention is not to go fast, it's to go slow. And if you have no questions, that's absolutely fair too, right? This was a walkthrough. I'm happy to pull the files back up if people want to see things again. If your brain works anything like mine, I have the code book up on one screen and one version of the data up on another so I can reference them without needing to toggle too much. If you don't have multiple screens, maybe doing a split screen could work. But in the Excel software, there's no way for us to embed the variable descriptions or codes directly, which is why we created the code book. So I could probably talk for another 19 minutes about data and about Excel, but I don't want to do that. I'd rather either be quiet or address some questions and comments. This is also a good time to bring up concerns, things you don't like about the data structure or the data files, to see if we could come up with creative solutions for making things easier for you to use.
Hey Ryan, it's Rosalind.
Hey, Rosalind.
One of the things that in analyzing my data I've had to do, and I'm curious if this is something other folks have to do, when getting from the larger list of motivations to getting to the smaller kind of combined motivation sets that are more segments, I had to kind of like back into which of those motivations combine into the categories. So I wasn't sure if there was a variable that did that combination work for me, or if it's just a matter of like being in my dashboard and looking at how many people said that they come for entertainment, and then looking at how many people said they came for the other one that gets squished with entertainment to create the segment of like socializers.
Great question. So to unpack that for everyone else, on the Art and Art Bridges surveys, the motivation categories that visitors are allowed to select are slightly different. There's a lot of overlap, but they're slightly different. And the theoretical articulation for those responses is they break down into kind of parent categories. So you could come for relaxation, you could come for recuperation. Those are, I think, distinct response choices, but they combine for like overall relaxation and recuperation. Don't quote me on those exact response options, but the idea is that two responses go into one. For anyone in art or art bridges, the coding for that should be right there directly after the motivational responses. If you're looking at your data, and you may have guessed, I did use a science museum, in fact, my science museum, so as not to inappropriately share anyone else's data. So you were looking at science, but if you look at your own art or art bridges file, your own data, and you're asking those questions, those should be piggybacked together, meaning, let me pull up one that has just been coded.
Brian, I have mine if you want me to show it. It was Julie. I
Hi,
have
Julie.
mine if you want
Yeah,
it.
yeah. So you can show it if you've got permissions, but Rosalind, just to verbally answer this before we see a potential example. Motivation, spend time, motivations, fun group. And then I thought it was, are they not right there?
No, they're not in the data file.
Okay, then would you be so kind as to show yours?
Yeah, I don't know if it's helpful. And I'm so glad I'm offering to do this while being recorded. How lovely. Okay. This is my data file, and here are the motivation questions. So they do sort of go in order, like I think interest and learn are both the learning one, and relax and peace are the relaxation one. Is this what you want me to show, right? Interact, community, or the social learning?
Is there any way you can, yeah, magnify it a little bit? Because all we really care about are the variable names, not the data
Mm.
itself. So just that top row. Um, I'm trying to pull up the cleaning syntax so that I can be very specific to address this question because I have good news, even if you don't see it. And for science folks, don't get dismayed. All of this will apply to you eventually in how we do things. Because the questions that are coming in the chat and Rosalind's question about
Oh, you're talking
tree,
about these. Look at this.
yeah, those.
Sorry. This is new.
Yeah, see, I did some stuff. We've been working hard to make things
You
easier and
didn't tell
better.
me.
Well,
Sorry.
that part of part of our goal on having this webinar was like to show to is like the grand release of like there's a new data structure here. So if you've used the data files before, take a look again because there have been changes. We've tried to make more consistent in terms of the order, so where you can expect things. Requests that have come in the past, we've tried to universally apply. Right. So like rather than saying Crystal Bridges or Rosalind and DeWalters, you get these motivation codes. No, wait, everybody needs those if they're the motivation questions in the art and art bridges side. So Rosalind, Julie, folks in art and art bridges, the coding for those parent motivation categories is already done for you, distinguished in the variable name from motivations to mot, right? So you can
Yeah.
kind of organize your data, but it should be right there behind the raw responses to the motivation section.
Cool. Now I have nerdy follow-up questions, but I don't want to take over.
Well, nerdy follow-up questions are great. If you could stop screen sharing just briefly, because
Absolutely.
I think that addressing personal questions or site-specific questions is great, but I'm wondering if people have
No, it
any.
would be for all art
Oh,
museums,
great.
not
Okay,
just
then do
me.
that. Yeah, nerdy specific questions nerdy questions
So
are.
the motivation question used by art museums has 12 items. They collapse into 6 dimensions. And I have thought about this in different ways, whether like, because you get to choose two. So you could choose one that would sort you into learning, and you could choose one that sort you into popularity. And then what in your new variables you've created, where would they land if they have chosen 2 items that are in different motivation dimensions? Which dimension do they get coded into?
Both.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I see some with both.
It's not a weighted score in that sense. It is just like if you selected both under relaxation, you got coded as relaxation. But if you social connection and relaxation, it's a one for both. So if you sum those or did any kind of bar graph, it should exceed 100% because visitors can be in multiple categories.
Cool. Thank you.
Um, So wait, Rosalind and Alyssa don't have that in your file? Okay, well, the good news is it'll be there in February for your January data. I don't know. I've been working on this for a long time, and I promise you the coding is there, so you'll get it. And if you didn't get it last week, you'll get it next week, or whatever that the newest data upload is. I promise. Beth Katz, does MOS use SPSS or Excel for analysis and reporting? And yes, Allison's already on it. I use SPSS for cleaning. That is mostly an artifact of we've been doing this for 8, 9 years. And I kind of started in SPSS and built syntax in SPSS, and then it's turned into all this historic syntax that I get to look at thousands of lines of code every month. It is exceedingly fun. You should all wish to be me.
I'll just follow up, Ryan, because in the poll, most of us are using these files in Excel, and like you said, not doing analysis in these programs, and it can be a real pain to work with these data files in Excel, especially because there's the separate labels and numeric. So it would be lovely sometime in the future if there was any whiz who could provide support or for analyzing and reporting within Excel. Because I find there's a lot of things I can only really get if I go to the Qualtrics dashboard versus the Excel file.
Yeah, so I should have prefaced that by saying cleaning. I spend a lot of my time in SPSS cleaning. So in order to automate the process by which, so I told you about the sheer number of responses and variables. I'm able to use one line of code in SPSS to split the science survey into individual site files just by parsing on the site name variable alone. Right? So in like creating the duration or taking into account all your time zones, right? Like to figure out all of the things. So I can't do that in Excel. I need to have some kind of more sophisticated software to create the system by which we give you these data files. And I use SPSS. We could use R. But what I'm hearing loud and clear and came up on December's webinar, based on the survey that we launched in October, is the need for more supports in Excel for analysis and reporting, which we are working on, right? Like our goal is to kind of roll this out slowly. The first one was just, have you looked at your data files? Do you know where to find them? Do you have questions when you open them? And we're kind of scratching the surface with that right now, with the goal of figuring out what the questions are and how to do more analysis and reporting in Excel over time.
Are
Thank
there
you.
any types of analysis you're thinking about specifically? So for giant data sets, we use SPSS and R, but for anything descriptive, I'm still using Excel. I'm using SPSS for inferential statistics. Are there any types of questions that you have in mind that feel higher priority to you for digging in the Excel files? Or anyone else?
We could launch this as a whole separate thing. Just give us ideas. But I think we've got a starting point. And then, Beth, I'm really glad you surfaced this because we will keep working on this, right? This is our goal for the webinars this year, is to kind of escalate a progression of tools and resources to better use our data. Okay, just to keep it short, I'm going to end the recording now, and then we're going to hang out online for the next, 5-10 minutes.